In the previous video, we saw how to route URL paths to view functions, and then how to use those view functions to render templates. Now there's one more piece of the puzzle, and that's the model. And the model is the data that you want to display in the template. So let's create a model. I'm going to go ahead and remove all of this. Now in store, you'll see that we have this models.py file that's created for us. And in here is where we will store classes representing models that will be mapped to tables in a database. Start off with SQLite, and then later on move to something like PostgreSQL. Now, like I said, each model is a class, so I'm going to start off here since this is a record store. Let's say we need a class for different genres of music. And every model class will derive from models.model. Now I can do is I can establish attributes of this class, and those will map to columns in the table in the database. So for example, a genre should have a name. And that name is going to be a character field, what Django calls a character field. And we can configure this column with various keyword attributes, such as max length. And I'll just set that to 255. Then something we're going to use shortly, but not right away, is the slug. And this is an identifier, or we can use as an identifier. It's a value that we can use as an identifier other than the ID. And notice we're not adding an ID. Django's going to add that for us. So we'll see how this works more later on. But for right now, let's just create a slug field and also give it a max length of 255. And then just to have something else to put in there, I'm going to put created, and I'm going to make that a date time field. And this is going to be the timestamp for when this particular genre was created. And there are a number of keyword attributes that I can add here, but the one that I'm going to use is auto now add. I'm going to set that to true. So when this class is, when an instance of a genre is created, we actually don't have to supply a value for this date time field. Auto now add will simply take the current time and insert it for us. All right. So now that we have a model class, how do we create instances of a model class? Well, the first thing we're going to have to do is have this model set up inside of the database. Now, as you can see down here, there's a DB SQLite 3 file. And I'm going to open this. And this is taking advantage of that SQLite extension that we saw in the first video. And I'm going to take a look inside of this, and there is nothing. It's completely empty. There are no tables. That's where this error that we've been seeing about these unapplied migrations comes in. So what I'll do is I'll go over here to my other terminal, and I will run this migration. Migrations are basically instructions for creating the tables in the database. And I'll say Python manage.py migrate. It's going to run a whole bunch of these migrations here. And then if I refresh, you'll see that these migrations have resulted in tables being created. Notice, however, that there was no table created for the genre. And the reason for that is because those initial migrations don't know anything about the genre. So I have to use Python manage.py to create or make a new migration. And notice that now it has said that this migration is going to create the model genre, and then I have to run that Python manage.py migrate command again. Now if I refresh, you'll see that there is a table for the genre, and it contains a varchar for the name, a varchar for the slug, date time for the created, and Django has conveniently added this integer ID for us. So how do we get data into the database. And there are a couple of ways to do this. And first of all, we'll start off by looking briefly at how to do this in code. I'm going to run yet another manage.py command, python manage.py shell. Now you see that this brings up the interactive console, the REPL for Python. And I could now start to execute Python code based on the code that's in the application. I'm actually going to quit this because I don't like using the I don't like using the default Python REPL. I like to use IPython. So all you have to do is if you install IPython, and then run python manage.py shell again, it'll use IPython instead, which is much more convenient. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll import this genre class. So I'll say from store.models import genre. And now if I look for genre, we'll say that it is of that type. To create a new one, let's say we create jazz. And you can see I've already done this before, but we'll go through the exercise anyway. Genre, and we'll give it a title of jazz and a slug of jazz. Now the slug is generally going to be, or for this instance at least, is going to be a normalized version of the title. And that's not actually, shouldn't be title, it should be name. Sorry about that. Name, there we go. And so, for example, if the name is jazz, then the slug would be just the lowercase, in this case just the lowercase version. But suppose we had something like Jazz Fusion, then it would be normalized to something like this. And the reason why is because we're going to use these slugs eventually in URLs in order to identify specific genres. But that comes later. But let's take a look at our jazz model that we just created, and we'll see that it is a genre object, and that this value here is the ID that Django will assign. And notice that right now it's none. And also, if we look at jazz.created, it's also none. And that should be a date time field. In order to populate these fields, we have to actually create the object or the model, and we do that with the save function, or the save method. Now, if I just look at jazz, you see that it has been assigned an ID of 1, and jazz.created has a date time. And if we look inside of the table itself, we can see that there is indeed. All right, there's also another shortcut to do this. So let's say genre.objects.create. And so now I could do one with a name of perhaps rock and a slug of rock. And this returns a new genre with an ID of 2, which indicates that it automatically saved it for us. And if we go back over here and look at the items again, we now see that rock was created for us. Now, this can be quite inconvenient when you're developing and you just need to insert data or change data around. So there's actually another interface that Django includes to help you with this, and we'll look at that in the next video.